Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques, and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning, and better sales results. Welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast, and welcome to a man that is that's sitting on Monday afternoon in Little Rock, Kansas, Mr. Mike Harbour. Welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Hey, Darren. Great to be here, man. Thanks for making time for me today. And it's always good to talk to somebody from down under. I hope you can understand my dialect here.
I can. In fact, truth be told, I was talking to a guy earlier this morning, Melbourne time, from Chile, and
Oh, wow.
he was complimenting me on my accent, and he said, "Are you Canadian?" I said, "Mate, I'm a dinky die Aussie." God bless him. God bless him. So, no, thank you, and it's great to be able to speak to you because you've got a long established history and credibility in the leadership space. So very much looking forward to this conversation. And you were saying before, just before you press record, hey mate, I told you I didn't know where we're going to go with this podcast. We were
Oh,
talking
good.
about, because you and I are very similar ages, and we're talking about headshots and photographs, and just tell the story about the little AI tool that you came across.
Yeah, what I love about AI is it kind of makes me smarter, Darren. I think at times, like I use AI a lot in my bit, like for my podcast, even every time I record a podcast, I'll drop the recording into an AI tool and it transcribes it for me and I can pull pieces out of it. So AI is really cool. Well, I saw this thing where you could put some pictures of yourself and it didn't matter what they look like. You could put some pictures of yourself in this AI tool and it would create headshots like you were standing in front of a photographer, right? And so I paid like $60 to get, I don't know, 100 headshots or whatever it was. And I got them back and I had to delete them all. I couldn't use any of them because it made me look older than I feel like I am, right? You ever have that feeling where you think, man, I can't believe they're as old as me. And then you see pictures
That's
and you
right.
go, wait, maybe I'm older than them. So anyway, AI is good for some things. It didn't work for my headshots for sure.
Maybe, and you would think that AI is supposed to make us younger because I've seen AI tools where it can put you into take your photo and almost turn you into a caricature.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen a lot of different things that it's used. And look, I'm not necessarily an early adopter to things. Like I wasn't the first guy. I got a buddy when iPhones came out, however many ages ago, he stood in line for hours to get the very first iPhone. And I was probably a year later before I got one.
Yeah,
Same thing with AI. Like I'm like, "Ugh, I don't know about AI, man. I don't know if that's the way I want to go." I use it every day now.
yeah.
But certainly, AI is a great tool for certain things, like maybe even creating sales scripts, right? We talk
Mm,
about sales or leadership or whatever, using it to create scripts. But there's some things, yeah, I don't really like it for because some of it's just goofy, right? And
yeah.
then some of it's not. I've seen AI pictures where people have 8 fingers and stuff like that, and it's so there's still some work to do on the imagery pieces of it, I think.
A little bit, but it's interesting you talk about that because particularly in business today, with the speed at which companies are operating and the expectations that are with people, it's all about how do we get more information into the hands of the people as quickly as possible, and things like AI can be used as an enabler for what we're doing. As long as we
Yeah.
don't replace ourselves and think, well, that's just the gospel. You've still got to make sure that it is consistent with your narrative, represents your brand, is on point in terms of the messaging you want to put out there. But I'm the same. I use it for a lot of the transcripts for podcasts. I put this, for example, this episode will go into an AI tool and it'll spit out articles, title suggestions, give me video reels and stuff like that. So very, very smart because it's used for efficiency.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we use a tool called Descript on our end for my podcast, and it'll transcribe it and it'll create shorts. So somebody on my team will take a video, maybe 30 minutes long, and say,
Mm.
create me 10 shorts. And you can select the one, you can select the text out of the transcript, create me a short for that.
Yeah.
And it'll just cut that segment out and create a video, maybe 30 seconds long,
Yeah.
or or you can just let it do it on its own and let it be that as well. So yeah, I mean, the speed at which and the cost effectiveness, right? I mean, that tool
Yeah.
cost me a few $100 a year versus tens of thousands of dollars for another human being to do
Yeah.
that. And
Yeah.
I love human beings. I'm in the human being business, right? But if I can save a few dollars to do the same work,
Yeah.
man, it's a valuable technology that we have in our hands right now.
It is absolutely, absolutely. So that said, mate, you are the president and CEO of Harbour Resources, leadership coach, leadership advisor, trainer, and also podcast host. So you've been running a podcast for, was it over 6 years now?
Yeah, over six now.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, I started publishing February the 5th, 2019 was my first episode of the Lead Up podcast. And it was really just to start getting my message of leadership, what I believe about leadership, how to lead people more effectively. That's what we're
Yep.
in the business of at Harbor Resources. So we've got Harbor Resources, the company, and what we do is we help people solve people problems, right? And from a leadership perspective. And then the Lead Up podcast is we do we teach lessons on leadership, but we also do interviews with leaders to get
Yeah.
different perspectives about how to solve those problems as well.
Nice, nice. So, Mike, what I love to do with all my guests is do a bit of a background, not a background check. Sounds like I'm doing some sort of FBI investigation.
Yeah, should have used AI for that, man.
Should have done that. Absolutely. But for the benefit of the listeners, always love to get a bit of background in terms of what you've done in your career and specifically what's led you to work in the leadership space that you work at today, because everybody has a different story, and it's really fascinating just to see. And the example I like to set for people is it actually doesn't matter where your background, what your background is, and where you come from. You can actually find your path and add real value to any community, any area that you want to. So, can you just give us a bit of background in terms of your career and what has led you to start up Harbour Resources and what you do today?
Yeah, great question, Darren. I think I have to go all the way back to my childhood a little bit, right? And I'm in the leadership business, helping companies and helping leaders lead themselves better, lead them others better. And I think that's really rooted from my childhood. I grew up in a very violent, dysfunctional, abusive home where there was no leadership. And so I was looking for leadership, right? I couldn't really trust the two people in my home I should have been able to trust most.
Yeah,
And so I left home at 18, man, with zero ability to communicate effectively with leading others and caused all kinds of challenges in my life, right? As an early leader. I've always kind of gravitated toward leadership roles, but I wasn't really good at it. I used my assertiveness, my aggressiveness, my loud voice to maybe help me be a leader, but I had to hone those skills. And I took every job I got, I was kind of promoted quickly because I was a get it done kind of guy. But when it came to leadership, I often kind of left people in my wake, right? I'd kind of burn them up and not lead effectively. I joined the Army when I was 22 in the
okay.
United States. And it's really there where I started that growth journey of leadership. I read my first book when I was 23. A leader that I had gave me a book, says, Mike, you got a lot of potential. You need to learn how to use it. And so, he kind of gave me my first book, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. And that's the
Yeah,
first book I ever read. I'd graduated high school. I'd gone to college for 4 years. Never really read a book. I read just enough to maybe make a passing grade on a test.
yeah.
But then that really kind of propelled me into I got to study. I got to learn. And man, I've been on a growth journey ever since. That's 30 years later now, over 30 years. And I've read hundreds and hundreds of books. I've been in many, many leadership roles. I've coached and trained thousands of leaders. And then, as part of that, when I got out of the Army, Darren, from a sales background, my first job I got when I stepped out of the Army was a sales job. I mean,
Okay.
it was selling people, but I was a recruiter, a headhunter, where I was hired to help this company recruit leaders for hospitals. My
Hmm.
background is healthcare leadership. And so I started selling people. Like I was a flesh peddler, for lack of a better term. And so I'd go out and find somebody and place them in an organization. I had zero understanding how to sell anything, right? I was scared to death of it. Here I was. I often tell this story, Darren. I came out of the military. The Army trains you to be, you're a trained killer in the military, but I was scared to death to pick up the phone, like, how do I pick up this phone and talk to somebody? Because I was
Because it
afraid I
weighs
was
so
going to mess
much,
up.
doesn't it?
Yes, I had to learn, leadership skills, but then I had to learn sales skills, and I couple those because really, at the end of the day, we're all salespeople. We're all
Yeah.
selling an idea. No matter what that is, I got to sell to my wife, I got to sell to my
Mm.
kids, I got to sell to you, and so I used to think of sales as a dirty word, but really, man, we're all in sales, and we're
Yeah.
always selling something, no matter what that is. We may not get paid for that, but we're
Mm.
we're getting paid in a way that somebody's going to serve us when we sell an idea.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love it. Love it. And it's interesting you say a trained killer in the military. And you can't pick up the phone to talk to another human being.
It killed me to pick up that phone. I'm like, oh my God, I'm scared to death to talk to this other person,
But
right? It
is
was,
isn't it interesting though that can, because our mind plays so many tricks on us. And I know we'll potentially talk about mindset today as well. But when you think about the fear that people, or the story that people tell themselves in relation to what could be happening at the other end, or you're approaching somebody, or even having a conversation about potentially helping them in their leadership journey, sometimes the fear of the unknown in terms of what's going to come back at you can stop us from actually making that first approach.
yeah. Look, I'm a believer today, Darren, and I didn't know this really growing up. I wasn't taught this, but everything, all success in life, I don't care what it is you do, whether it's selling, writing a book, speaking in public, or, starting your own business, all success begins between your ears, right? It's
Does.
how we begin to think about ourselves, number one, and then how we think about other people. I mentioned, earlier that sales is often a dirty word to a lot of people. Well, that's a conditioning thing, right? I
It is.
remember being told growing up, man, don't bother them, don't ask too many questions, don't bother people while they're working, don't bother people while they're at home. And so when I started my business, Darren, this is a great story for people to learn. I started my business in 2006. And when I started my Harbor Resources, I started as a recruiting firm. I don't do any
Okay.
recruiting today. All I do is leadership development and coaching today. But I started as a recruiting firm because it's what I knew.
Mm.
And the first and biggest sale I made at that time, I've made many bigger sales since then, but the biggest sale I had made up until that point happened about 6 months after I started my business. And I had to call, I was calling on this hospital and to help them find a CEO. And I wanted desperately I had never done a CEO search, and I wasn't sure I could do it, but I knew I had to sell the board chair on doing it. And I couldn't get a hold of this board chair. They wouldn't put me in touch with him. So I got on the internet and I found his phone number and I called him at dinner one night and I made the sale, right? He was sitting at his dinner table when I called him at home, by the way.
Mm.
And he was like, "How'd you get my number?" I'm like, "Well, the internet's a dangerous thing, right?" And today it's even more dangerous. But here's the thing: I had to overcome like the voice of my dad saying, "Don't bother people while they're at dinner. Don't bother people at home. Don't call people at 6 o'clock. They're eating." Like I had to get over all of this conditioning
Yeah.
to make that phone call with, trepidation in my voice to make that sale. And of course, that was a difference maker in my life, right? It
Mm.
really, oh, wow, this is possible. And here
Yeah.
I am 18 years later, I'm still in business. I'm 19, March will be 19, 19 years when I started my business. And so, but it all began with like the voices in my head I had to overcome and say, okay, if I want this, I got to do this.
Mm.
That's what life is all about, right? If I want something, I got to take action on that. I got to
Totally.
overcome, I got to step across that terror barrier in some respect, whether it's having a hard conversation in leadership or having a sales call, which is what many of your listeners do.
Oh, absolutely. And for many of us, it's overcoming, I guess, the perception as to, and this is the projection we put onto people. They're not going to be interested. I'm going to be interrupting them. They're not expecting my phone call, right? So it's going to surprise them, and they'll go into defensive mode. All of that stuff plays out in their head. Whereas if we actually say to ourselves, you know what I have to offer, irrespective of whether they end up buying it, is going to be of service. So how can I be of service? How can I serve this group? How can I serve it? How can I leave this person with an impression of increase to say, hey, they feel better for having actually picked up the phone, right? Whether there's a sale or not. Completely
Yeah,
different
I
thing.
mean, the thing about selling is, and you made the key distinction there, when you can change the word selling to serving, I'm doing people a disservice by not letting them know what I do.
Totally.
They may have, look, that CEO, Darren, this is no lie. I could give you his name and phone number if you don't believe me, that I placed in 2007. Okay, that from that I called that board chair 2006, closed the deal January 2007. I still got the check. I can remember it like it was yesterday because it was kind of a stepping stone for where I'm at today. That CEO that I placed later that year in 2007, about 4 months later, is
Yeah.
still the CEO of that hospital today, like 18 years later, right? Incredible. But had I not got up the gumption to make that call, I couldn't tell that story, right? The
Yeah,
answer is
absolutely.
always going to be no until you
Yeah.
until you make the call, right? So it truly is just we're serving them, and that's the way I look at like what I do today. I'm not
Yeah.
selling anything. I'm adding value to people, and
Yeah.
if they see the value in it, they'll buy, and if they don't, they won't.
And that's
Um,
it. That's it.
that's the way we have to look at what we do and everything in life.
Love it. Love it. So, Mike, I'm really curious. You started out in 2006 as a recruiter headhunter, and was there something that happened along the journey that got you to pivot and concentrate on what you do now in terms of purely leadership?
Yeah. So, what I didn't say when I was in the Army, I was a trainer. I
Yeah.
trained people in the military. So my first love is really developing people to be better, because look, just to step back into my childhood a little bit, I didn't have any of that coaching and development. And so I was always hungry for that.
Yeah.
And I'm a true believer that everybody's got way more potential in them than they ever use or live out. And so for me as a leader, I don't want people to struggle in their leadership. And so I love developing this aha in people. Like I just had a coaching call right before this with a high level, C-level executive with a company. First coaching she's ever experienced. And
Yeah.
and she's been in leadership for 12 years.
Yeah.
And it was like oh, wow, I should have been doing that all along. Oh, thank you. That's a great idea, right? It's creating this aha for people so they don't struggle as much in leadership. So really for me, my background in the military was training and developing people. That's my first love,
Mm.
because recruiting was more transactional, where I place somebody, I leave, I got to go do it again. Where
Yeah.
training development is more relational, and I build business that way. Like that CEO I said I placed years ago, 18 years ago, I've gotten business from him from my training business, right? Because it became a relationship versus a less of a transaction. And so in 2010, I had a company. There was a recession in the U.S. and I do most of my work in healthcare, and it started really affecting the healthcare market. And so I was trying to figure out how can I differentiate myself from my competition. And so I started adding some personality assessments to my recruiting process.
Hmm.
And so when I'd place somebody, now they have this kind of personality assessment on an individual. And then we would add what we called 6 months of stay coaching between the person we placed and the manager to make
Hmm.
sure that placement stuck, right? And
Yeah.
so it wouldn't break down in the first 6 months, because I'm a believer that's the most important time in a new employee's life anyway.
Yeah.
And so through that, we started differentiating ourselves. And I had this company started asking, "Hey, can you do more coaching for us with other leaders in the organization?" I'm like, "Yes, I can." And so I used that as an opportunity to start going that direction. It probably took me 5 or 6 more years before I made the full, like I was doing both. I was training and
Yeah.
recruiting, training and recruiting. So I probably didn't, it was probably 2016 when I did my last search for
Yeah.
somebody. I don't remember the exact year, but I still dabbled in both for about 5 years until I got this training business where I could, generate enough of an income to just say no more to recruiting. And
Yeah.
that's really how I made that transition.
Love it. Love it. So when you look at, because you mentioned before you operate predominantly or you're specialized in the healthcare sector, and You think about you started your podcast in 2019, and then we experienced COVID over 2020, 2021. In the healthcare sector, I could imagine that is when they needed lots and lots of assistance, lots and lots of leadership. So can you just describe, I guess, your experience through that time, particularly in healthcare? Because I think out of adversity comes great opportunity and great lessons that you now look back and say that was a pivotal moment, either in healthcare or in particular your business.
Yeah, I think for me, I don't know if it was luck or, I'm a Christian believer, Darren, so maybe it was God's providence in my life or whatever, but I had started a few years before COVID, not knowing COVID was coming like no one
Yeah,
else. Right? I didn't know it was coming, but I'd started kind of adding some virtual coaching and training and resources to my business. As I said, I started doing a podcast in 2019, so started using, more and more technology. So when COVID hit, my business kind of blew up. I mean, it expanded because now organizations are trying to figure out how can we create more well-being for our people, more help for our people, but how can we do it? Because we can't have Mike come in, right? I mean, I had some clients, they would continue to bring me in, but we're masked up and everything. It did
yeah,
change, but the clients that I did have or that I had struggled to get, we moved everything to digital. I was already set up. And
yeah.
so, where it's helped me is like even today when I close a new deal with a client, it's more of a hybrid approach. Instead of me always being on site, we do a mixture of live and virtual training and all my
Mm.
coaching that we do one-on-one coaching with a lot of our customers. All my coaching is done virtually
Yeah.
most of the time, unless I'm on site and some of those people need some coaching while I'm there. But it really did shift how training and things were delivered.
Mm.
Luckily for me, I was kind of moving more that direction already. And so I was ready. I was able to pivot very
Yeah.
quickly. I didn't lose any business. I gained business for sure.
It was interesting I'd been doing a lot of coaching on Zoom as well. But I guess the workshops and the training, 99% of those leading up to March 2020 were face to face.
Yeah.
And I remember the day, I think it was the 13th of March 2020 was when it really hit home that this thing is going to last a little bit longer than 2 weeks. And that was the day that the Australian Grand Prix was actually cancelled.
Oh,
And
wow.
and there was thousands and thousands of people waiting to at the gates to get in, and drivers had already left because they knew something was going on. But then very quickly, companies realized that they needed to continue to communicate. They needed to continue to train their people, give them all the resources. So it pivoted to online training. And for 2 years, 99% of the training was delivered via Zoom,
Mm,
which was great because I just had to sit in this office and provide training.
yeah.
It was a lot harder than face to face because it's you got to work harder to keep people engaged. But it
Hmm.
also meant that a lot of companies now embraced more of a short form of training as well. So breaking up, say, a 2 day training into lots of 3 hour increments, which was easier to digest. So it's changed the way that companies have done business. It changed the way that we do business in terms of training. But I want to ask you in relation to your experience out of this and companies and how they lead teams that perhaps are not necessarily in the same location. So working with senior leaders, because I was having this conversation yesterday about with somebody about how do I more effectively lead people who are not in my physical location.
Yeah, I think number one here, I'm gonna fix my camera so it'll quit doing all this adjusting.
It's go, it's
Uh,
going in
yeah.
and out.
Look, I've got one of those cameras, Darren, that tracks me, but I
Mhm.
set it up when I do these podcasts where it won't track me, and then because I talk with my hands so much, it starts reading my hand signal, and then it wants to follow me everywhere. So I apologize with that.
No, you're
But
all right.
yeah,
All
I
good.
think what remote team leadership creates is the need to be a better leader. Okay. I mean, so what I do a lot, because I work with a lot of teams, the leader I was talking about just a minute ago that I coached before this podcast with you, she has 9 locations that she leads. So she has to be able to lead remotely. So one of the things I challenge her to do is at least once a month you show up at one
Yeah.
of those places, right? So you just wrote you need to get on site at least once a month to one of those locations, and you just
Yeah.
every month you're at a new location. So that's number one. You got
Mm,
to intentionally be present
mm,
once in a while with those people. The other thing you have to do is, I think, as you mentioned a minute ago, engaging with people virtually is harder than live in, face to face with people. So leaders have to have a really strict agenda when they meet with people virtually, right? I think you need to have an agenda that you're sharing with that person you're about to meet, and not that you got to be rigid and follow that to a T, but you need to have some sort of agenda where they know what to expect on that virtual session. You follow the agenda. I believe that virtual meetings need to be shorter versus
mm,
longer. I have some companies that, they want me to come in and do a 3 to 4 hour live session. And then they say, well, can we just make this a virtual? I'm like, not for 3 or 4 hours. I would die. I would die personally, but so will the people on the other end. So what we try to do is figure out a way I try not to go more than 90 minutes on a virtual training session with
yeah.
people, because I have to be better. My energy has to be better. And here's the mistake a lot of leaders make is when you're virtual, your energy is everything anyway. People are reading our energy and picking up on our energy and responding to our
Yeah.
energy. And in a virtual environment, you need to make sure you intentionally go into that with, I'm not saying you got to be fake or you don't have to be a cheerleader, but your energy
Mm,
needs to be higher than it's ever been. Anytime, from a face, if you're live with somebody on site, you can get away with a little bit lower energy. Leaders still need to have the highest energy in the room. But from a virtual standpoint, what I teach leaders to do is start on purpose, like make sure your energy is at a high level when you start that. So again, intentionally go into it with a high energy purpose, go into it with an agenda, make it regular, like
mm.
not once a quarter, but once a month, in your virtual meetings. And it should be maybe even once a week, depending on the role and what KPIs and objectives you're trying to meet. But I think virtually, when we lead people virtually, we need to be more intentional and more regular, not less. Because what happens in a virtual environment, or what happens in an on-site environment, we have these random kind of run-in meetings with people, right? But
Totally.
virtually, that doesn't happen. So we
No.
have to intentionally make those meetings more regular, shorter but more regular. So maybe a 15-minute meeting versus an hour-long meeting, but maybe 15 minutes weekly.
Mm.
Or if you're only doing once a month, it's got to be an hour. That's kind of
Yeah.
my coach advice for people.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And you know what? That's exactly we might be kindred spirits, my friend, because that's exactly what I shared with this person yesterday.
Great.
You've got to be more intentional, and especially you've got to have your energy levels at a level that is probably bigger than what you would normally do face to face. And the other key thing I said to her was you got to make sure your camera's on as well.
Yeah.
That's-
Yeah. I mean, look, body language and tone of voice is 97% of our communication with other people. I mean, that's all
Mm,
backed by research, right? And so I can't tell if someone's engaged if they don't have their camera on, but you have to lead that as a leader. Your camera needs to be on first. Hey, my camera's on. What's going on with yours, Darren? Let's get it on. I'd love to see you, my friend, and
that's it.
let me just make sure you got your makeup on. And kind of like what you and I did, I made some jokes about, my looks or my picture or my age or whatever, right? You can have fun with it without saying, "Hey, Darren, are you not buying into what we're doing here? Get your camera on, man." I mean, I can do it in a more fun, energetic way. I don't have to
Totally.
be, you know, you know what to try to get somebody to follow what I'm wanting them to do.
Which brings me to this point because I noticed, did I see a photograph on your LinkedIn profile? Is there a photograph? Is that you with John Maxwell?
It is, yeah, sure is.
Mate, they say that it's 2 degrees of separation. I have
Mm.
literally every single book that John Maxwell has written, and I refer to him in just about every one of my leadership programs. I just he's an incredible individual. Um, And now I just forgot what the question was going to be. Because I've been starstruck because I'm sitting in front of greatness who's been connected to the source. Um, I've literally forgotten what I was going to ask you. How's that, Mike? This is
Well, look,
brilliant.
I'll talk a minute till you remember. How about
This is
that?
brilliant.
I,
It's brilliant.
I too, to my left, I got a library here in my office, and I've got every John Maxwell book he's written too, right? I was a John Maxwell junkie at 23 years old. And I think, when I mentioned, Darren, I didn't read a book until I was 23. I was given, what I didn't mention, I said I was given a book. I was actually given two books. One was Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. The other was Developing the Leader Within You by John
Yeah.
Maxwell. And I fell in love with John at that time. I was 23 years old. And so I started
Mm.
devouring lots of John Maxwell stuff. The way he talked, the way he taught, it was simple, but it connected with me. And in 2011, so back to what you asked me when I quit recruiting and started coaching and developing.
Yeah.
In 2011, John started a company called the John Maxwell Team. And I'd been a
Yeah.
follower of John's forever, listening to his books, reading his books, never met him. But when he started that company in 2011, I was one of the first 300 people to sign up. I'm like, sign me up. And so now, I got to spend time with John. I got to sit at the, table with him. I got to share the stage with him. So that's me
Yeah.
on stage with John. And I was lucky enough to learn right from him and people around him. I helped co-host the John Maxwell podcast for a little while. I was a chairperson of the John Maxwell Leadership Award that we did back then. They don't do that anymore, but so I spent a lot of time with John, a lot of time with that team. I was a faculty member on that John Maxwell team for a little
Yeah.
while as well. So, very blessed to meet John, but not only meet him, just even get to do some things with John and learn from John. And I've gotten so busy over the last several years that I haven't been around John in a while because my business grew to a point. Because of John, a
Yeah.
lot with John, but I learned some things from John that have helped me even today in my business that I'm still grateful for sure.
And I think I remember what the theme of the question was going to be. It was to do with the levels of leadership and how there's a lot of leaders, as you're referring to the way you interact with people, and are you gonna tell them what to do, or you're going to incite them and encourage them to follow you. And I always remember him talking about the fact that, you could be a leader, and this is where the five levels of leadership comes into it. You could have the positional title, and people will follow you because they have to, because that's what the organizational structure says. But we want to
Mhm.
get to the point where, as leaders, we have people who are choosing to follow us. Um,
Yeah.
and when you think about that in the work that you do with leaders, how important is it for leaders to really think about why they're there and what they stand for, and how do they create a culture and an environment where people choose to be part of that environment rather than they have to be part of that environment because they've got things like bills to pay.
Man, it's such a great question. You're speaking to my heart now, man. First of all, let me speak to the five levels. When I'm talking to people about those, I challenge every leader to strive to be a level four leader. Don't strive to be level five because level five usually is assigned to you after death.
Yeah.
You did something good and now they say, you're gone. Man, that guy was really good, right? So strive to be a level four leader, which is a people developer, right? And I think John said this, but I share it a lot. The true measure of leadership is a leader who can develop a leader who can develop another leader, right? So our leadership is measured by our ability to develop one person that can develop another person.
Mm.
That's our true measure. And so if we wake up every day thinking about, okay, how instead of thinking, how can I get more done? How can I develop more people?
Yeah.
Right? That's really where we step into this purpose. And that was really transformational for me, Darren, because I'm a doer. Like I'm an action taker. Let's get to the finish line. Let's run as fast as we can. And I led that way. And that's really about, either level one positional or level three, which is production. About let's just get it done. I don't care who I have to run over to get it done. That was my early kind of leadership. One of the things that I teach, I have a program called Elite Leader, the Elite Leader now, and the very first lesson we teach in the Elite Leader is to craft your personal leadership definition. Like, what
Hmm.
is your definition of leadership? What does that mean to you? How do you live that out? And my personal leadership mission, it's really a quote by Jack Welch, who led GE for a while, and I've kind of modified it to fit me. But the quote is, when you were made a leader, you weren't given a crown, you were given the responsibility to bring out the best in others. And
Love it.
now go live that, right? And so
Yeah.
every day I'm like, okay, how can yeah, I'm the president of my company, right? I'm in charge of a lot of things. I get to tell people what to do a lot of times, but is that really who I want to be? What I really need to do is bring out the best in my team so we can serve more people.
Mm.
And I think, back to your question, is it begins with knowing what you stand for, knowing what your definition of leadership is, and to every day, what I call start on purpose.
Mm.
Every day, repeat that definition to yourself and say, okay, how am I going to do that? Who am I going to do that with? How am I going to develop more people? That's how we really kind of move from that level one positional leadership up to that level four leadership that John teaches.
I love that. But I also know that there's going to be still a lot of opportunity for people like you and I to continue to work in this space because there's a lot of, I guess, organizations that don't necessarily share the same philosophy because it's all about, hey, get the number, do this, get the outcome, don't care what you've got to do, make it, because it's all about our company and our survival and hopefully our thriving. Um, what do you say? Because I'm sure you work in organizations where you've got a bit of dysfunction, where you've got leadership that's a little bit disconnected from the people, and there's a bit of work to be done to recoup and actually get the faith back in the leadership.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at environments today, what are some of the things that you still find is challenging, or doesn't necessarily disappoint you, but you sit there and think, if only they knew, if they flipped their focus on being more of a servant versus more of a command and control sort of agent, things will be different.
Yeah, what you and I do, Darren, is not new, right? I mean, people have been talking about these things for many, many years. The idea of servant leadership has been around for a long time. Unfortunately, and again, please forgive me. I don't know enough about the culture of Australia to speak well, about it. But what I know in America is a culture of and I'm a capitalist. We're a capitalist society, right? Let's make as much money as we can. Let's accomplish as many things as we can. Let's run over as many people as we can to do it. And I believe in accomplishment and abundance and prosperity. I believe in all of those things. But at the same time, because, during my rough childhood, I was raised by my grandmother for the most part, who is the greatest servant in my life that I know today. She's been dead. She died in 1998,
Yeah.
right after I got home literally a month after I got home from the army. I was glad I was home.
Wow.
But, she was a great servant in my life. And my grandmother grew up in the Depression. She had nothing, but I can go back to my hometown today where I grew up, and she's been gone since 98, and people still talk about the way she made them feel, right?
Wow.
There's an old quote by Maya Angelou that says that people don't will not remember what you say, but they will remember how you made them feel.
Mm.
And that's what my grandmother did. She made them feel like they were something special. I mean, she's the reason I'm standing before you today, man. She made me feel like I had something to give, something special, right? And I think what I try to do when I go into an organization, that certainly every organization I have has some level of dysfunction,
Mm.
either really deep or maybe surface level dysfunction. I really try to connect everybody to that. Every person has value. John talks about it in his number 10 principle, in one of his books, that he wrote. And, I go back to what my grandmother says, how can I add value to people? And really what I'm trying to do is help connect leaders to the value of the individual. And oh, by the way, Darren, I don't care how much you know. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, right? I mean, that's
True.
that's John Maxwell's quote.
Yeah.
People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so it begins with that caring about people first. And if we do that and we do it well and we do it consistently, not one time,
Yeah.
not once a month, but if we do that well, we do it consistently over time, the profits, the bottom line, the revenue will always take care of itself.
Mm.
There's plenty of research to back that up. So that's where I kind of begin is getting people to kind of search their soul and what is it that you want? Well, everybody wants to feel valued, right? So
Yeah.
if you want to feel that, what are you doing to make others feel that underneath your leadership? I think it begins there. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's what popped up for me when you asked it.
No, I love that, Mike, and I fully agree with that. There will be companies out there that listen to that and say, oh, that's this hocus pocus mumbo jumbo. We're here to drive numbers and our bottom line, and we've survived for X number of years and we're still on the upward trajectory. But then when you look at it, there are people that perhaps are working despite the company. And at some point, this is my belief, at some point there will be an event that happens where all of a sudden the loyalty that the company thought they had is no longer going to be there because
Mhm.
people within the organization are going to now look out for what's in it for them.
That's
So,
right.
as
That's right.
leaders, we have to also understand that the team is and always will be a reflection of us. So, what, as you said before, what do we stand for? What's important to us? What's our value set? And how are we going to serve? And how are we going to look for the long-term future of the organization, not just the short-term elixir that many people are looking for?
Yeah, I mean, let's think about this for a minute. Um, Gallup has studied this for years, and Darren, I've been in this business a long time, like you. There's been little to no change in employee engagement worldwide,
Yeah.
meaning the employees feel like they're part of something special and they'll give that discretionary effort. Trust is at an all-time low around the world, right? With by and in trust in leadership. And so here's what happens. What I do is I help companies really focus on their turnover and retention, but it's all of that stuff combined. You can look if you're a leader right now and you're turning over people frequently. The first thing you need to do is look at how you're valuing those people. If
Mm.
people are turning over, then there's a value issue with how you're treating them, how you make them feel, how are you developing them. Many companies, and I call this an excuse, many companies say, well, they're leaving because of money because they took a job where they got a little bit more pay. Here's what I know in my experience, especially in healthcare. Most people leave a job and take another job doing the same thing for maybe the same pay, or
Yeah.
really close to it. Maybe they got a little bit of a raise, right? Not enough. I mean, taxes is going to eat up the raise, so it's not
That's
really
it.
a raise. And so if that's the case, there's got to be another reason they left. And so then we have to look at culture. We have
Mm.
to look at leadership. We have to look at what we're doing to develop them. And in my research and all the research that's out there, the number one reason someone decides to stay with a company is do they feel valued by their leadership? And there's a
Mm.
lot of different ways that people feel valued. One of the number one ways is we develop them into a better human being, not just employee. We don't just focus on, Darren, you're doing this wrong or you're doing that right. We help them become a better person. That may mean like maybe they need some learn how to be a better financial steward of their paycheck, right? Maybe they need to learn how to negotiate a loan to buy a house. Maybe they've got some challenges with dealing with a teenage child. That's
Yeah.
like personal development. That's
Yeah.
different than work, right? And we can do things inside of organizations to make people feel valued. Then they feel more engaged to the place that they work and they'll quit asking for raises all the time or they'll quit leaving for $1,000 more a year, which is not really a raise anyway. That's just Mike Harbour's opinion, by the way.
And mate, at the risk of sounding like this as a mutual mutual admiration society, I fully concur with that and agree with that. Because people leave organisations not because of the organisation, they tend to leave because they're not valued by their one up or the two up leader, and statistics bear this out time and time again.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
in the work that you do, particularly around culture and engagement, leaders that are listening to this who might be finding they've got some challenges with trying to build an engaged culture. They're trying everything. They're just not getting that engagement. Are there some things from a cultural perspective that they can focus on that, with a bit of patience and with a bit of persistence, can provide some, I guess, return on that effort over time to increase engagement, to increase and provide a better cultural environment for people?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I teach in my book is target check our values, right? One of the things we need to spend more time doing as a leader with our teams is talking more about our values as an organization or our values as a team. Okay,
Yeah,
now here's what I do believe we can do a lot of things right as a leader and still have some corporate cultural issues that impact us, right? Maybe I'm trying to be a really good leader and under my area of responsibility and scope of leadership, but there's some other cultural things within the organization
yeah,
that are going to affect that. I first want to say I understand that, but before I say this, you can't change that always. What
mm,
you can do is you can change how you lead right in front of you, right?
yeah,
You can get better as a leader. And I always say this, get better right where you are. That way,
mm,
if things fall apart and you have to leave, you're a better leader for the next organization that decides to invest in you.
absolutely.
So I'm always about growing myself, right? So let me go back to target check my values. One of the things I teach leaders to do is sit down with their teams and create a list of, 3 to 5 core values that we want to operate within our team,
Yeah,
and it could be organization wide, but at least within our team.
yeah,
And then and then always ask the target check our values is, and when I teach this, I draw like a bullseye up on on the wall. And we want to get as close to bullseye with that every single day, whatever that value. So what's the definition of that value? So if it's trust, what's the definition of trust? And
mm,
then how do we live out trust? Like how does Mike Harbour live out trust? How does Darren Mitchell live out trust? If I'm an employee on this team or my team member on this team, how do I show up? What are my behaviors? What are my actions to really live that value out? And get really clear on those core values within your team, within
yeah,
those behaviors. And then from a cultural standpoint, you as a leader, all your team meetings, all your one-on-ones should be focused around, okay, Darren, here's where you're doing a great job of living this value out. So we coach people around the values instead of saying, Darren, man, that's you're not doing a good job. You need to work harder. We make it about the values. Hey, Darren, one of our values is excellence. What does excellence look like as it relates to work ethic and the way
mm,
we show up to work? And so we coach people toward the value alignment versus the behavior misalignment, right?
yeah,
It's easy to go around as a leader and say, Darren, you're not getting to work on time, your work ethic's not very good. And so all we do is we create more disengagement. I want to create alignment
yeah,
with my values. That's one thing. And then the other thing is something I call talent lock conversations. Okay. And what a talent lock conversation is as a leader, at least once a quarter, if not, bi-monthly or every other month, have a conversation with every one of your employees and talk to them about what makes this a great team to be on? What makes this a great organization to be a part of? What makes it really hard to work here? What's some of your biggest frustrations in being a part of this team?
wow,
If you were in my shoes, Darren, as the leader, what would you do to change the culture of this team, right? And so I call these talent lock conversations where I'm really giving my people a chance to speak into our culture and what we can do better. Now, a lot of leaders won't do that, Darren, because they're afraid of the answers.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah, they're afraid of the answers. They're afraid that they're afraid that somebody's going to say something bad about my leadership. And so, what I have to teach from a coaching perspective is, Darren, you got to set your ego aside. This is not about you, it's about the culture, it's
Yeah,
about the value they're wanting added to them on the team. And, Darren, by the way, you can't solve all those problems, but you
mm,
can listen and you can try to move the needle a little bit and you
mm.
can be responsive to those things. And those are just a couple things from a there's a lot I got a lot more ideas, but those are a couple big things that I think really make a significant impact in culture.
I love that, and particularly the fact that you're having a regular conversation around not just, hey, how you're performing, where's the number, what's happening with that customer. It's about, hey, tell me how you're feeling, tell me what your perspective on the culture is, how can we improve this? Because I've got to say, my experience with a lot of organizations is the leaders don't have enough one-on-one conversations, or they leave the conversations for that performance review at the 6 month mark or the 12-month mark. And then they provide feedback to the employee about, oh, you know what, Mike, back in August of 2024, you said this.
Yeah.
That was not the right thing to say, my friend.
Yeah.
You're
Six
thinking,
months ago, you're bringing that
come
up.
on. So this
Yeah.
culture of no surprises, but also what it says to the employee or the people within the team is, you know what? I don't have to have all the answers. I don't have all the answers. I'm actually wanting you to make a contribution because you can get a different perspective and provide a different perspective that can help lift the entire culture of our team and therefore the organization. So
Yeah.
I think it breeds engagement, it breeds independent thinking, and it breeds empowerment.
Yeah. So Darren, let me just ask you a question for the listeners, just as a hypothetical. If you and I were driving down the road, I'm driving, and you knew I was about to drive off the cliff, would you wait until I drive off the cliff to correct me, or would you do it before I drive off the cliff?
That's a very obvious question, Mike, and I would be unless we're in what's that movie where they drove off the cliff?
And they have a parachute, I hope.
Yeah, that's right. Whatever the movie is, I've forgotten what the movie is.
It's the same thing in
Yeah,
leadership, right? Our people want to be course corrected. They want to be course corrected, but as close to the need as possible, not after they've gone off the cliff,
that's it.
not 6 months later, right? In my experience, Darren, most leaders try to have a talent lock conversation when the employee is resigning. Hey, I'm leaving. I'm taking another. Oh, I want to lock you in. I want to keep you. What can I do to keep you? Can we give you more
That's right.
money? Right? They're
Yeah.
trying to lock the talent in now. It's too late at that
No,
point. And
no.
so what I teach leaders from a cultural standpoint is create this talent lock conversational rhythm where, once in a while you're having some conversations with them about what would keep them, what would cause you to leave, Darren. I
Yeah.
mean, hey, I know it's been a rough week. Is there anything that keep you coming back on Monday? Is there anything I can do today? I mean, have it before they drive off the cliff, is what I'm saying.
It's a great point you make, Mike, because in all the leadership trainings I do, I'm often asking leaders, why do you work at this organization? Why have you chosen this role and this organization, and what keeps you coming back every single day? And it's amazing how many people actually don't have an answer for that because they're really not given it a thought, because many of them have been promoted because they've been a great individual contributor, have been thrust into a leadership role, but haven't necessarily been given, I guess, the support to make that transition. But then I asked them the question, so do you know why your team choose to work in this organization and choose to work for you?
So
And
good.
it's like, no. Well, so how about you ask them? And that's what you're saying. It's getting to know people at a human level to the point where they feel valued, and when they feel genuinely valued, not because there's some pawn in some game of chess, if they're genuinely valued, they're more likely to increase their discretionary effort to therefore deliver more consistency and therefore more results. It's not
For the
hard
same money too, for
for
the
the
same
same
money.
money. That's
Yeah,
it, because they're valued. They're valued.
absolutely. Yeah, that's so good, man. You hit a lot of good points there. And if we want, I love your questions because why do your people work here? Why do they choose to work for you? If you don't know that as a leader, you're in trouble
Yeah,
because what I always talk to leaders about is I want to know that if the bus is coming down the road, people are not going to push me out in front of the bus. They're
yeah,
going to tell me, "Hey, the bus is coming. Don't get run over," right? And
yeah.
if you've not like done some relational development with your team, they may not push you out in front of the bus, but they may not tell you it's coming either if it's about to
Mm,
run over you. And that's really and again, look, I said this earlier, most people are afraid to ask that because they're afraid of the answers.
yeah.
And it's really one of the things, look, I'm a very high ego, high pride individual. And I had to learn early on to set my ego and my pride aside if I wanted to get better as a leader. I beg for feedback from people around me. And because if I'm screwing up, tell me
Mm,
because I want to do better. I may not always agree with you, but I want to know what can I do to lead you better.
yeah.
And I also want to know, like I've got this company I'm working with right now. They recently lost 8 people from a team. And what I've discovered is because there's a bully on the team.
Right.
And I'm like, well, how long has this bully been an employee? Well, for a while.
Yeah.
Well, why haven't we coached the bully up or gotten rid of the bully? I mean, it's
Mm.
costing you more money in turnover and recruitment to keep the bully than to get rid of the bully, or at least coach the bully up and not
Yeah.
allow them to be a bully, right? It's
Yeah.
costing you more money. And so, as leaders, some of these talent lock conversations, we find out there's a bully on the team. Now, I'm not saying we got to go beat the bully up. I'm just saying we got to get engaged with that and coach that difficult employee up to fall in alignment with our values. That's why target checking our values is so important.
It's such an important point because there are so many companies out there that they'll have values of the organization, but they're typically done by a steering committee who they believe represent the view of the business, and therefore they come up with that set of values. But it's really the behaviors that we see on a daily basis that generate the real values of the organization. Our role as a leader is to make sure that whatever the values we've come up with as a team, we've got those behaviors that are underpinning that to make sure we've got consistency. And then when there are people like the bully that comes in, we hold them to account very quickly. And it may not be and should not be just the leader that does that, it should be their peers that do that. And that takes courage, but that's the culture that we've created of I guess, joint accountability.
Yeah, I mean, it gets really good to be a leader when you got a team that will hold each other accountable. And I don't have to, they don't come running to you all the time. Hey, Darren is misbehaving. Well, what'd you do? What'd you talk to Darren about? I mean, did you handle it? Like
Yeah,
I always got to solve your people problems. But again, that requires leadership and development and coaching to get to that place as well.
absolutely. Absolutely. So, Mike, conscious of time because it's probably beer o'clock for you in Little
It's near
Rock.
my bedtime, man.
So as we look forward into 2025, and there's been a lot of events happening around the world. We're about to have an election sometime in the next couple of months in Australia, so that's potentially going to change again. As you look in the role that you're doing in your work in the US, look into 2025. What is a couple of things that you're really looking forward to that you think can really help leaders exponentially improve not just I guess their influence, but the environments that they're creating and looking after.
Yeah, look, man, the world is a crazy place right now. And as you know, in the States, we just got a new president and not to get political, but there's a lot of change going on, right? And I don't know whether to be excited or nervous. I don't really choose sides in politics very often. I do love change, but I get nervous about it, right? I
Mm,
believe, and I believe like right now in America, we've got to change the way we lead, the way we communicate, the way we do healthcare. I've been saying literally for years, Darren, the world is screaming for leadership.
yeah,
And that's never been more true than right now.
yeah,
And so I think, what I'm excited about is that I hope that people will embrace the change that's coming because we're not going to be able to solve it. Like I tell people this every day. I can either get concerned about what's coming or I can create my own environment, right? And
yeah,
I'm a believer in creating my own environment and try to get ahead of that. Like I talked about, I was ahead of COVID without even know it was coming. Like
yeah.
where do I see the future going? I'm a believer that, as leaders, we need to create the culture, the environment that we want, despite what's going on around us.
Mm,
And that means you can't wait to see what's going on. You can't wait to see what's coming. It means casting that future. I teach a principle called sapere vedere, Darren, and that's just a Latin term that means learning how to see.
yeah,
And I
okay.
teach it from three lenses of leadership. The first one is hindsight. And what that means is I need to kind of look back and what have I done well that I want to carry forward?
Mhm.
What have I not done so well? I want to make sure I leave behind. Okay. That's just a simple version of that. And then the second lens is foresight. Like I need to be able to look around the corner. So as leaders, I'm really trying to help people like look around the corner. What do you want? Not what's
Yeah,
coming because you can't control that. But what do you want? Let's look around the corner. And then use hindsight and foresight to create insight, which is that
yeah,
third lens. And insight's all about taking action. Let's take the good of the past. let's take the vision of the future and create insight to create action today. And that's what I'm really excited about is people. I see people more action oriented right now than they've
Nice.
ever been.
Brilliant. Love it. Love it. Mate, absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. For people who want to know more about the great man Mike Harbour, and connect with you and learn more about what you do, where's the best place for them to
Yeah,
go to?
thanks. Yeah, Darren, first of all, thanks for having me, man. This has been a fun conversation. I've done a lot of podcasts, and this has been a fun one. So I appreciate that. I'm on LinkedIn, Mike Harbour on LinkedIn. I'm on my website is Harbour, Harbour, resources.com. You can also go to leaduppodcast.com if you're interested in listening to my podcast. So those are the three best places to find me.
Brilliant. I'll put those on the show notes, and want to thank you for being a brilliant guest, mate. It's been a pleasure. Even though we're on the opposite sides of the world, it seems like we've got some very, very similar thoughts around leadership. So greatly appreciate you being on the podcast.
Yeah, man, you too. You were definitely a kindred spirit, as you mentioned earlier. It's all, I love meeting people. That's what the great thing about technology, right? We're 12, 15 hours apart, but we're
That's it.
talking like we're right in the same room. And that's the
That's
great
it.
thing about technology today. I love it.
Brilliant, mate. Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right, take care.
Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.